to thank Ann Adele for sponsoring class today. This is in honor of our son's Yortzeit, Baruch Ben Avram. He should have an aliyah. He should go higher and higher in the heavenly worlds and watch over the entire family. We were speaking last week about the first sentence of the Shema and the rest of the Shema. And we mentioned the Jewish law that for the first sentence of the Shema, when we say that first line of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, one should be stationary, not walking around. And then when they recite the rest of the Shema, first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph, then they could be, if they need to be walking, traveling, it's fine. And what we did was we compared it to this verse about Abraham. That Abraham at first was like Noah, resting, staying in the same place, and then Lech Lecha, he was journeying. And the idea, the concept behind this is that for that first sentence of the Shema, we need a withdrawal from the world. We need to focus, an inner focus on our relationship with God, on our faith in God, because the world shows us conflict. In the world, we see conflict with godliness. We see conflict with goodness. We see things that just don't seem to make sense. So first we need to do is Shema Yisrael. We need to take it all in, block out the world, and realize Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, God our God, God is one. That ultimately all of the world is part of a master plan. And we play a role in that master plan as the soldiers of God and as the chosen people of God. Once we have firmly established our own faith, now we can go out with the rest of the instructions of the Shema of taking the message to the world. Towards the end of last week's class, I used an example that I'd like to continue on this week. And the example was the difference between Shabbat and the rest of the work week. Shabbat is that time in which the Jew withdraws to themselves, to their own soul, to their own family, to their own community, drops the world for a while, so that they will have the spiritual strength and the spiritual energy during the week to take that spiritual message and bring it into the workplace and bring it into the world. For hundreds of generations, our people, Shabbos was the epicenter of the week. If you go to any of our great-grandparents, the focus of the week was always Shabbos. If you were to be able to have a conversation with your great-great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather, and ask them to describe Shabbat, you would hear something like this, that Friday was a very hectic day. There was a lot going on, there was a lot of cooking, there was a lot of baking, there was a lot of shopping, there was a lot of preparing. It was very hectic in the home. And then at some point, everything stops. As the sun sets, there's a new energy takes over the home. It's a very peaceful energy. And it begins with the lighting of the candles. And when this candle is lit, whether it was the bubby of the house or the mommy of the house, they would make the prayer on the candles and they would bless each and every one of the members of their family. They would cover their eyes in this mystical, spiritual, holy prayer directly to God. And at that very moment, the home was transformed into a palace. It made no difference how poor our great-grandparents were. And it made no difference how shabby the houses or the apartments that they lived in were. But for that very moment, it was a palace. And the father and the mother were the king and the queen, and the children were the princes. And they felt it. They felt the royalty of the moment. They went to shul, they sang some songs, they said some prayers and came home, and the table was set, and the wine and the challah. There was a beauty to it. And they began to sing the Shalom Aleichem Malachei Hashoris together, welcoming the angels to their home, to their palace. Remember, all this time, the world is frozen in its place. The focus is this dining room table, this palace, this family. And tradition had it that the father would bless each and every one of his children at that time. The kiddush was made, and the warm challah was put out, And a beautiful meal took place, with some singing, with some words of Torah, with just conversation, with just getting to reflect on the week. How was the family? Parents and children got a chance to stop and to schmooze and to talk. Spouses got to talk to one another. For one night of the week and one day of the week, people knew that they can talk to one another without competing with the cell phone. Right now you talk to one another while you're texting. Yeah, sure, yeah. But Shabbat was free of all of it. How much that is needed today more than ever before. Where we live in a world of disturbance, where there's so much disturbance out there. And we need that Shabbat spirit of our great-grandparents so much in our lives today. There was a father that had a family of children who were not getting along with one another. And no words that he can say to them did any good to try to bring peace and harmony between them. Then he fell ill. And before he left this world, he wanted to leave one final message to his kids to get along. And so he took a bundle of twigs and put them together and called all his children and asked each child to take the bundle of twigs and try breaking the entire bundle. They couldn't do it. The bundle was too thick, and therefore they couldn't break it. And then he took an individual twig and gave it to each one and said, can you break it? And each one was easily able to break it. And that was his parting message to his children. If you stay together, nothing can break you. If you stay apart, anything and everyone can break you. Shabbat for the Jewish people was that moment where the family came together so that nothing could break us. It was that holy time that we shared together, and it gave us the strength to go through a week. In this imaginary world, imagine there is a convention, a conference, of all clergy, of all denominations within the Jewish people. Reform, conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, all the names that you can possibly come up with every label attached to it. And everyone gets together and there is a debate at this conference. The conference is focusing on one question and one debate. And that is, do you need to be Orthodox to enjoy Shabbat? Is Shabbat monopolized by just religious observant Orthodox Jews? Or does it belong to all denominations? And after much debate, the verdict came down that you don't need to be Orthodox to enjoy a day of serenity, a day of depth, a day of love. It's not monopolized by Orthodox Jews. Because if you think about it, these movements, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, every one of these labels, they're rather modern, meaning you go back 100 years, 200 years the most, and yet we kept Shabbat for thousands of years. Which means Moses wasn't an Orthodox Jew, because Orthodox didn't exist. What existed? Judaism. That's the way it was for thousands of years. We complicate things when we start coming up with new labels and new movements, new denominations. And we start thinking this mitzvah belongs to that denomination, this mitzvah belongs to that. No, that's nonsense. Shabbat belongs to each and every single Jew. It's a gift that God gave every one of us, and it is not to be monopolized by any group. Because you don't have to be Orthodox to enjoy family time. You don't have to be Orthodox to enjoy God time, spiritual time, holy time, time of serenity, time of depth, time to really revitalize what is so needed in life. And so it's something for each and every single one of us that we need to find our way, to find our path, to bring more of Shabbat into our lives, to give ourselves this gift of Shabbat. So as Friday night is arriving, Plan on it, whether it's this Friday night, next Friday night, the next one. Find out what time candle lighting is and light those Shabbos candles. And insulate for that 24-hour period. Insulate yourself from the phones, from the computers, from even the news, from the television, from Netflix, from everything on the outside. Try it. And just focus on self, family, spirituality, community. Leave everything else alone. The world will be there Saturday night after Havdalah. Yeah, maybe you'll have to catch up on some scores, who won what game. Now baseball is over, so you don't have to worry about that. But it's going to still be there. But you will have gained that spiritual energy that we so much need in our lives. So try it. Try incorporating more and more. And if you've already done that, bring more of the Shabbat into your life. Perhaps start having some guests at your table. Every one of us, and wherever we are in that spiritual ladder that we climb, could find a way to bring more of this for ourselves and for our friends. You've heard of Justice Louis Brandeis. He was the first Jewish justice on the United States Supreme Court. He was appointed to the Supreme Court by President Wilson in 1916. And understand, there was major opposition to a Jew being put onto the Supreme Court. There was a lot of anti-Semitism still going on, and a lot of opposition to what is a Jew doing on the United States Supreme Court. But Brandeis was brilliant, and there was no denying that brilliance. And President Wilson won out, and his nominee was put onto the Supreme Court. And he was considered, and still is considered, one of the greatest champions of human rights in U.S. history. He also happened to be one of the earliest Zionist leaders in the United States. The Brandeis family arrived in America with the first wave of Jewish immigrants in the year 1850. That's when his family came here. And like most Jewish immigrants of this period, they originated from Germany, and they didn't really observe Judaism. Though the family, as we know, never denied their Judaism, never denied their ethnicity, but they didn't practice it. But Brandeis had an uncle. His uncle's name was Louis Dembitz. And Louis Dembitz was an observant Jew. And he was a powerful role model in the life of Louis Brandeis. He was a lawyer with a sterling reputation. And Brandeis' own decision to follow a career in law was influenced by this uncle. So this uncle had tremendous influence on Louis Brandeis' life. He so admired his uncle that he changed his middle name from David to Dembitz, so that he always carried his uncle's name with him. Though, as I mentioned, Louis Brandeis himself was not an observant Jew, he once described the impression that he got from watching his uncle keep Shabbat, and the effect that it had on him in his life, seeing how his uncle loved this day so much. And I read from Brandeis' own writings, I recall vividly the joy and awe with which my uncle Louis Dembitz welcomed the arrival of the Sabbath day, and the piety which he observed it. I remember the extra delicacies, I remember the lighting of the candles, I remember the prayer over a cup of wine, the quaint chants, and Uncle Louis poring over books most of the day. I remember more particularly an elusive something about him which was spoken as the Sabbath peace, and which years later brought to my mind a passage from Addison in which he speaks of stealing a day out of life to live. Uncle Louis used to say that he was enjoying a foretaste of heaven, and I used to think, and still do so now, that we need on earth the Jewish Puritan Sabbath. That's how his uncle influenced him. You may have heard of a very, very popular Rebbitzin. Her name was Esther Jungreis. She passed away a number of years ago. She traveled the world speaking. She spoke by us 2 different occasions. A very emotional, uplifting, inspiring woman. who herself was a Holocaust survivor. And she devoted her entire life to inspiring Jews to make their way back home, to come back to tradition. And so she once told the story of her childhood. She was a young Hungarian girl, and she and her family were deported by the Germans to Bergen-Belsen. More than 100,000 died there. When the British liberated Bergen-Belsen in 1945, they found 13,000 corpses of Jews unburied, just lying just lying there. And 60,000 survivors left, but most of them severely ill. And so she's describing what life was like for her as a child in Bergen-Belsen. My father, she said, was Rabbi Avraham Jungreis. And he would hide from every day's ration of bread that they would give them to live on. He would take a piece off and hide it. So that every day he would take an extra piece off and hide it. He would count the days with us. Children were together with him. And we would count 6 days to Shabbat, 5 days to Shabbat, 4 days to Shabbat, 1 day to Shabbat, and then it was Friday night. And he would find a way to gather us into this hellhole on earth. And he whispered to us in Yiddish, "Mein lichtige Kinderlach, my precious children, macht sie de Augenlach, close your eyes." He would ask us to close our eyes. And then he would ask us to travel with him and imagine with him that we were back home. And remember the smell of Mommy's challah. Think of the smell of the home Friday night. Stay in this trance with me. And dream with me. And smell with me the challah of your mother. And then he would open up this handkerchief where he hid the bread from the whole week. And we had the extra challah. As he was talking about us imagining our mother's challah, we ate these extra crumbs that he had put away for us. And then he would sing right there in Bergen-Belsen with his children, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaShareis, Malachei El. On one occasion, says Esther, my younger brother said, Tati, Tati, I don't see any malachim here. I don't see any angels here. Where are the angels? My father started crying because it was a powerful question. Where are the angels? And he said to my brother, my lichtige kind, you are the angel. Over here, you children, you're God's angels. And so we went around all day with this belief that we were now God's angels. And it was with that spirit that we survived, knowing we weren't just here in a concentration camp to be counted to be killed. We were God's angels, still here for a purpose. So although they stripped us of everything a human being would need to feel the basic sense of dignity, they took away our shelter, our home, our safety, our family, our food, our bathrooms, our respect. Yet our Father managed to make us feel like angels. And that's the essential message of Shabbat, because it allows us to focus on our true sense of worth, of our true identity, of that which is real in our lives. Every single Jew says the Baal Shem Tov. This is a powerful teaching that we need to repeat to ourselves every day and live with it. The Baal Shem Tov says every single Jew needs to see themselves or herself loved by God just as parents love their one and only child. You know, when parents are only blessed with one child, that child is the epicenter of their life. That child is everything. That love is how we need to feel. That's how God loves us. So no matter where destiny takes a Jew, no matter in what situation we may find ourselves, no one can rob us of our higher purpose. To be that angel of God, that angel of Shabbat, a source of blessing and a source of serenity. I'll close with one more story about Shabbat and then we'll move on to Shema. About 35 to 40 years ago, there was an American rabbi that was visiting Miami. He was lecturing. And the subject of his lecture was Shabbat. He gave his talk, and towards the end of his talk, he said, you know, there's a story that I heard. I heard this story years ago, but I only heard the first part of the story. But it's a powerful story, so I'm going to share it with you anyway, even though I ask for your forgiveness now that I don't know the end of the story. I just know the beginning. He said there was a yeshiva that was run by the Chafetz Chaim, one of the great sages of his time. This great sage lived in a very humble house himself, but had such a great following of students and was known throughout the entire world as one of the great tzaddikim of his time. And in this yeshiva there was a teenage boy. And this teenage boy wasn't that into it. And he was starting to go off the path a little bit. And one time, this teenager was caught by the faculty, by the staff, smoking a cigarette on Shabbat. You can imagine in that period of time, in a completely observant yeshiva atmosphere, yeshiva run by the Chafetz Chaim himself, that this was a big deal, right? And so they're debating suspension, expulsion, send him home. How are they going to punish this kid for this great sin? And word got to the Chafetz Chaim about this. And the Chafetz Chaim said, send him to me. Send him to my house. I'd like to speak to him. And they did. And this boy went to the Chafetz Chaim's house. No one knows what was said. All we know is that the boy came out in tears, went back to yeshiva, and excelled in yeshiva, was never suspended, was never expelled. That was about it. That's the story that this rabbi remembers at this lecture in Miami. Everyone's leaving the room after the talk. There's one elderly man that's still there, waits for everyone to leave, goes up to the rabbi and says, and where did you hear this story? He says, I don't know, it was just there. He says, well, let me tell you the end of the story, because it was me. I was that boy. It was me. I didn't have the excitement for Yiddishkeit, for Torah like the rest of the students. It wasn't with me. It wasn't part of me. I meant no great rebellion, and I liked smoking, and I got caught. I was a chutzpah. And to be honest, if they would have kicked me out, it wouldn't have bothered me. It would have bothered my parents, but it wouldn't have bothered me. I didn't feel it was part of me anyway. So I wasn't worried. Kick me out, kick me out. But when they said, no, your quote-unquote punishment is that you need to go see the Chafetz Chaim himself, now I trembled. Because after all, he was a world-renowned holy man, and to have to face him, knowing what I did and knowing that he knows what I did, that was hard for me. So the rabbi says, no, what did he say to you? How did he scold you? What did he say? What words of admonition did he say to you? He hardly said a word. I came into his house, and it is, as people say, this most humble house, so simple to believe that one of the great Jewish leaders of our time lived in such simplicity. And he looked at me, and he held my hands, and he just stared into my eyes. And I can see tears starting to come to his eyes. And while staring at me and holding my hands and crying, all he said was, Shabbos. The Heilige Shabbos. Holy Shabbos. That was all he said. He held my hands and all he did was cry and said, Shabbos. And one of his tears fell from his face and landed on my hand. And I tell you, I still feel the scar of that tear on my hand till this very day. Never forgotten it. And that's all I needed. That was all I needed. No punishment, no words of scolding. It was simply to see the love that this man had for Shabbos, that he cried that one of his students smoked on Shabbos, that it brought him to tears, and how much he loved me, even though I did this to him and to his school. He embraced me with his warmth, with his tears. And I've never violated the Shabbos ever since. That is all that I ever needed. Shabbos. Shabbos is our Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. It's what gives us the ability to go out the rest of the week and do what we need to do as a Jew and as a member of the chosen people. In the book of Deuteronomy, we've studied the first line of the Shema. We've studied the first paragraph of the Shema. And sometime during this semester, we're going to get to the second paragraph of the Shema. But first, this brief summary of the Shema. Things we covered some years ago. That very word Shema, let's start with that. What does it mean? It means listen, right? What else? Hear. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, listen. Or internalize, which is the better translation. Shema Yisrael, internalize what I'm saying to you. Yet throughout the Torah, there's another word that's used quite often as well. Different of the Shema, we have the word Re'eh. What does Re'eh mean? To see, to visualize. Interesting. There are times that the Torah uses the word Shema, and there are times it uses Re'eh. See and listen. We find it using the word see, where God wants to emphasize and point that there is an eyewitness testimony going on. You saw. He'll use the words Le'enei kol Yisrael, before the eyes of all of Israel. He'll use that quite often. This happened before the eyes of all of Israel. The Exodus took place, not in the book. We don't know about the Exodus because it's published, because someone made a film about it. Le'enei kol Yisrael, because it happened before eyewitnesses. Your Zadis and Bubbies, your ancestors saw this happen. We don't celebrate the holiday of Passover because we're told to celebrate a holiday. Le'enei kol Yisrael, we celebrate it because our grandparents were there. They witnessed it. They experienced it. Splitting of the sea, the same. The revelation at Sinai, the same. Le'enei kol Yisrael. All these miracles took place before their very eyes. They witnessed it. They saw it. And so we use that word re'eh, see, visualize. But this open revelation of God, this revelation that made God perceptible on earth, that our ancestors were actually able to see in some type of way God, to see the miracles of God, to see the hand of God, visualize it. That happened only once in history. The revelation only happened once. And that laid the foundation for the formation and the founding of this chosen people of this Jewish nation. So that that first generation that were the eyewitnesses, God's witnesses, when they would want to pass on to the next generation what they saw. Imagine you, in whatever experience it is, you witnessed something, you were there at something that affected your entire life. But your children and your grandchildren weren't there. But you are. And their children and grandchildren that love you and believe you you. They know you're not making up stories. And you want to share that experience with them. What do you say? You say Shema. Listen closely to what I'm about to tell you. Take it all in. Internalize this. Because what I witness with my eyes has to get passed on from one generation to the next. So my dear children and my grandchildren, Shema Yisrael, listen to this, because you're going to need to pass it on to your children and to their children. And think about this. We have been doing this successfully for thousands of years. We still say to our children, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. How do we know that? Because our ancestors were there at Sinai and experienced God. And so, Shema, take it all in. Internalize this. Hear what we're saying to you, because we were there. We saw it. And what we're giving you is eyewitness testimony. Our knowledge of God rests upon the testimony given to us by our ancestors. Yeah, we could make, and we do make, claims to our faith on many, many avenues. We could look at nature and come to a conclusion that there's a God. The beauty of nature, the wonder of nature, the beauty of science and the wonder of science, all of this can lead you to God. We can make a case of God, of belief in God, because look at the Jewish people throughout history, how they survived. It's only a supernatural miracle that we could have possibly still been. The article of Mark Twain, which we've read many, many times at our classes, echoes that. It's impossible. What is the secret of the immortality of the Jew? The answer can only be God. We can talk about particular miracles in your life that led to faith. We can talk about the miracle of the birth of your child that led to faith. But the ultimate, the real answer to faith for us is our Zaydis and Bubbies were there. All of our Zaydis and Bubbies were there, and they all passed on the exact same Shema Yisrael. Here, my dear children, we were there. That's the most powerful element of the faith of the Jew. That there is an eyewitness generation that passed it on carefully, and that's what the entire book of Deuteronomy is about, and that's why I call the study of the book of Deuteronomy the chosen people. If you want to know anything about what our mission is, it's what Moses is passing on to that first generation that's leaving the wilderness, that transformation from wilderness Jew to Israel Jew. That's that critical moment. If we can make that link, we have a chance to make it throughout history. And we've done a magnificent job. So that first generation that heard directly from God, that saw directly God, that experienced the miracles, their testimony to the next generation continued till this day. Proof, when it came to Passover, you ate matzah. It's not the most tasty food out there. You ate it anyway. Someone told you to. And you'll say, God, yes, God did, but someone told you that God wants you to eat the matzah. And it goes past from one generation to the next, to the original generation that was there when they left Egypt and they didn't have time for the bread to rise, so they went out with matzah. With our eyes awakened by God to see him in nature, with our ears open to hear him in history, with all of this that I said, now we're able to find God in every part of our lives. We're able to see the connecting of the dots, that God has always been there for us as a Jewish people and for us as individuals. But it begins with Shema. It begins with that connection to our grandparents. God is referred to in the Torah by a variety of names, different names of God. The two most used names of God are the four-letter name of God known as the Tetragrammaton, representing God as he is above nature, supernatural. And it's also the name of God that represents love and kindness and mercy. The second name of God that we use often is Elokim, or Elokeinu. And that's God as he is within nature, and also represents God as justice and law. When we say Hashem Echad, God is one, what we're really saying is all of God is one. So even when we're experiencing, or we think we're experiencing strict justice, it's coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of mercy. And it's the harmony of love and justice and mind and matter and infinite and finite that makes up our faith. In the Torah scroll, the actual scroll and in the mezuzah, the word Shema has 3 letters. It has a shin, a mem, and an ayin. The ayin of the Shema is written in big. It's a little larger size font. Then we have the end, the last word is echod. The last letter is a dalid, echod. That dalid is also written in a little bit of a larger size. So the question is, and we know this all the way back from Moses, that that's the way we're supposed to write it. Why? Why is the ayin and the dalid written larger? So there is the simple explanation that I'll give you, and then the more esoteric explanation. The simple explanation is we wanted to make sure that the scribe doesn't make a mistake and write shin, mem, aleph, which sounds exactly the same way as the ayin, because that word means shema. Maybe there's a God. And that word would not be good for the faith of the Jew. So therefore we want to make sure the scribe gets it right, so we make the ayin a little bit bigger. Make sure it's an ayin, not an aleph. The dalid looks very similar to a letter resh. They're very similar. The difference is the dalid has a more of a square corner, the resh has a more of a rounded corner. But other than that, they can easily be confused to one another. We want to make sure the scribe doesn't make a mistake and make a resh instead of a dalid, because what does that spell? Acher, another God. God is one, not God is one of acher, there's another one. So that's the reason these 2 letters are written in big. But the more esoteric understanding, if we take the ayin and we take the dalid and we put them together, we have the word aid. Aid means a witness. Ultimately, this is about you reciting that first line of the Shema, as we said, in stationary position, which means internalize it deeply within yourself, and when you're done, go out and be a witness to the world. Go out and take what you know about God and share it with the world. Go out and take the morality and ethics of Judaism and share it with the world. Go out and take the loving kindness of Judaism and share it with the world. Go out and take the charity and the goodness and the kindness of Judaism and share it with the world. Be that chosen people. Not chosen people to be arrogant above the world. Chosen people to share goodness and blessings with the rest of the world. And we'll stop at this point. We'll continue next week, making our way into the second paragraph of the Shema. There is a class this evening on the subject of Joseph. It's at 7:30. You can get your Zoom links if you go on jewishacademy.com. We are up to Act 2 of the story of Joseph this evening at 7:30. Also, 1 week from this coming Monday night, not this Monday, but 1 week from this coming Monday night, there's going to be a 2-part series. It's called Permission to Doubt. It's being given by Rabbi Dr. Michael Langberg, and it's on a lot of these subjects of faith that we've been discussing. It's a 2-week series. It's on Zoom. You can sign up for free at jewishacademy.com. Have a wonderful week, everyone out there in Zoom world, and there's lunch for everyone here that braved coming in live person. Those of you in Zoom land, if you want to join us next Wednesday, 12:30, you're more than welcome to join us. We'll have lunch for you too.
Just want to say something that
Sure.
also means